we're back. This is the Great Classic Rock Debate. I'm Kenny.
I'm Steve.
And we are without Paul for the moment, but we're hoping that he will join us. We talk anything and everything classic rock. We try to keep it interesting. We try to have fun. If you're watching right now, please like, comment, and subscribe. We will love you for that. And we do a lot of topic jumping. So we were on one thing last week. We'll be on something different next week. So for this week, it is my understanding, you just mentioned to me, Steve, that David Johansen, one of the foundational members of the New York Dolls, passed away. Yes. Why don't you go ahead and fill us in on whatever details you have, because I didn't even know this.
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, it was announced that he had stage 4 cancer, and I can't remember what type of cancer it was.
Okay.
And he's obviously revered by so many people in the music industry. I mean, New York Dolls has always been kind of an underground sort of.
Definitely.
But musicians really, it was a heavy influence upon musicians.
Right.
And guys like Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, I know, big fans of him. And they had announced on Duff has a show on Sirius XM that he had cancer. And then I think it was over the weekend, Sunday or Monday, I saw the headlines that he had actually passed away. And so I was not a huge fan of the New York Dolls. I was certainly aware of some of their, probably 2 or 3 of their songs. But I came to be, I guess my first introduction really was to David Johansen as an actor, and probably as the
Buster Poindexter. Right. I knew that was coming.
Yeah. And so that's always what I knew him as. And then later I discovered the New York Dolls, and I'm like, wow, that's such a change. And
right.
And I really like their music. And again, I'm not the hugest New York Dolls fan. I know a few of their songs, but I never purchased any of their records. But listen to a lot of single streaming wise. But
right,
just pretty sad, because that we're probably going to talk about that show Vinyl.
We're going to get to that, yeah.
We'll get to
let me throw this out, because this is going to be interesting. So, growing up in the mid 70s, I was there, and I was listening to FM radio, and I was familiar with all the popular songs and bands. I never once heard of the New York Dolls. I never, if you had said, do you like that song by the New York Dolls, I would have assumed that they made a mistake. Don't you mean the New York Yankees or something? Yeah. I never heard of them once. And then probably right around, it was early 80s, and it might have even been on MTV. I remember seeing a live, it was like 3 songs. It was like a medley of songs. It was David Johansen, and he sang these 3 songs. One of them was a song by, it was a 60s song. Who did House of the Rising Sun? The Animals. One of them was a song by the Animals. I forget now which song it was. But he did this medley of 3 songs, and I kind of recognized all the songs, but I see that name, David Johansen. I didn't know who that was. And I go, okay, I realize now that we've got some guy here singing a medley of rock songs from the 60s, I think, but I don't know who he is. And his name doesn't ring any bell, David Johansen. So I'm not really sure why I should be digging this, even though he's got a pretty good voice, right?
Yeah.
So then not long after that, somebody said to me, he was a member of the New York Dolls. As if I'm going to say, oh, that's who he is. I go, who is the New York Dolls? I never heard of the New York Dolls. Yeah. Go, they were, like you just said, they were kind of an underground band.
And I was growing up, when I had first heard of the term of the New York Dolls as a teenager, I didn't know that it was. I assumed it was a female band. It wasn't until I got probably into my early 20s that I recognized really what it was. So
right. It was underground, and it was a unique combination, because it was around 73 or 74 that they first broke out and made an album and had songs that were being played. And it was sort of a little bit punkish. Their outfits played a big part, because they were guys, but they had sort of a feminine
look. They were probably
Yeah,
the original glam band.
they probably were the original glam. You're probably right. Yeah. And so, but the visual appeal was a large part of why they were becoming popular. And we should include they were an essential part of that New York alternative scene, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah.
It was sort of punk and sort of new wave and sort of whatever. The Talking Heads were part of that, I guess, around that time. So anyway, they're making records and they're really catching on once again with that underground crowd, but none of their stuff is being played on mainstream or top 40 radio. Okay. Now, and then I'm going to say, so then I see this David Johansen guy. I don't really know who he is. He clearly can sing. And then it's a few years later when I see Buster Poindexter on MTV singing Hot, 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 which I already know because I DJ. I already know that's a Caribbean song. It's originally from one of the islands. But the thing is, and I have to be fair, his version is so good. All right. Unless you're playing to actual authentic island people, his version is going to kick that party into gear much more so than the original, which I think is a much tamer version. That's just my opinion. But I grew to like him just because of that. Plus, any guy who doesn't take himself seriously, right, and can get out there and sing this kind of goofy song and do the goofy dance and wear the goofy outfit and all that. He doesn't take himself seriously, but he's clearly having a good time. It's just hard not to like him. So, and I kind of expected he's probably never going to have another hit, but whatever. For that one, he struck gold. Do you want to add any thoughts?
Well, I was reading up on that a long time ago as to why it was that Buster Poindexter and not David Johansen, and it really because it was such a departure from who he was as a musical artist beforehand, and so he didn't want to have it tied to either the New York Dolls or him personally. He wanted a separate persona. And
I understand.
I don't know if he ever released another song or had another hit as Buster Poindexter released another single.
He did release another song probably about a year later, which I remember hearing 1 or 2 years later. Didn't take off the way that one did. But anyway, so that was kind of his career arc. He started with the New York Dolls, did a little bit of solo stuff, and then in the late 80s was Buster Poindexter, and then that was kind of the end. If he did additional stuff, it didn't make a splash, but that's what he did, at least that he's going to be known for. So,
and he was in a couple of movies too. He was an actor. He was in Scrooge.
Yes.
As the cab driver, and then in a Richard Dreyfuss movie, Let It Ride.
I don't think I saw that.
Which is about him at the dog track. David Johansen, I think, was I can't remember if he was his friend, but he was the guy at the track. He may have been he wasn't the guy taking the bets, but I think he was just another gambler. Let It Ride is a horse racing movie. Well, it's really about Richard Dreyfuss spending one day at the horse races and him just going from a string of bad luck and finally, winning the jackpot on the last race of the day. But
I remember seeing David Johansen in 1 or 2 movies, but I would have never remembered what they were. But anyway, so he did a little bit of everything, and his face was out there. So it's the kind of name that people might say I don't recognize, but then they see his face, they go, okay, I've seen him before. I just didn't know his name. Yeah. Also, before we talk about Vinyl, TV series from a few years back, Vinyl, you mentioned before he went on that Gene Hackman had passed away. I just wanted to give that a quick moment. This guy was one of the best actors, and his resume is so strong. I'm telling you, back during the 70s and 80s, and I guess even 90s, all you needed to know was Gene Hackman's in it. You didn't need to know anything else. Gene Hackman's in it. It's a good movie. The guy
I can't think of a bad movie that he was ever in. I'm sure maybe there's one out there, but I can't think of one that.
And the best thing is he would sometimes be in those sleeper movies that you would say, I've never even heard of it. And then when you see it, you go, how is this thing not an Oscar nominee? I mean, he was in so many good movies. So he was clearly choosy about which projects he agreed to be a part of. and I guess had a good eye and ear for
Yeah.
scripts, or somebody did.
He was the definitive version of Lex Luthor. That's what I first remember him. When I was a kid, we had HBO, and probably the one of the first movies I remember seeing on that was Superman.
Yep.
And that was one, to me, to this day, that's still my favorite superhero movie of all time.
Yeah.
The original Superman with Christopher Reeve and Gene
Right.
Hackman. He should have received an Academy Award
Yeah.
for that movie. So
Yeah.
for his portrayal of Lex Luthor. So
I concur. Yeah. Yeah. Really good. Really good. And well, just on a quick little side note, he was also in there was a '60s version of Bonnie and Clyde with Warren Beatty, and he was in that, and he was one of the gang members, I guess, but
yeah,
he was very good, very memorable. I think that movie almost kind of launched him. He really went from being a backup player to a superstar after that. But anyway,
yeah,
we're a classic rock show, but I just have to mention that because, man, that's a sad thing. And the circumstances are very weird and strange and mysterious around his death, he and his wife. So, I
yeah.
don't know.
I mean, he was 95. So in fact, I was surprised. I thought maybe he had passed away anyways, because he had retired from acting
Right. Like
probably
20
a
years
good
ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's still very strange as to what actually happened there. So
Yeah. And I hope that in the weeks ahead we find out more. But for now, we don't know too much. Okay. So that brings us to vinyl. All right. So I don't recall the exact year. I'm thinking it was around 2016, 2017, something like that. Okay.
yeah, probably about
So
2016. Yeah.
okay. So I don't recall exactly how I even found out about it. I think somebody in the gym who knew I was interested in music asked me, "Hey, have you seen that show Vinyl?" And I had never even heard of it. So I said, "I don't think I know what you're talking about." So he said, "Oh, well, it's a series on, I think it was on HBO. It was on one of the premier
Yep.
networks."
HBO. Yep.
Okay, HBO. And wasn't it produced by Martin Scorsese and Mick Jagger or something like that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Scorsese directed the first episode, but yeah, they were both listed as producers for the
Okay.
show.
So just that right there, if I go with nothing else but just that, it's a series, it's on HBO, it's something about the music industry, and it's produced not by a couple of nobodies who we've never heard of, by Martin Scorsese and Mick Jagger. And not only does that mean it's a big budget production, but you've got two guys who are involved in the industry, because Scorsese is not only a movie director, but he's been involved in a lot of music projects too.
Yep.
And you could say the same thing about Mick Jagger, I guess, in reverse.
Yeah.
But those are the two kind of guys who, if they're going to take on a project like this, they're going to do it first class. And so I was kind of excited. I said, "Wow, let me check this out." So I went home and I started watching it. And the opening episode, and it's our talk about David Johansen and the New York Dolls that leads us sort of into this. So the main character is a guy named Richie. I think that was his name. And the actor, I don't remember his name, but you recognize his face. He's another one who's not really a
He's
big
been in
star.
a lot of like Marvel. He's been in Ant-Man. He's the one of
He
the
was, he was,
yeah.
yeah. When I saw him in that, and I think he's a good actor.
Yeah, he's a good guy. A good actor.
He's like the president or CEO or something of a record company, but they're kind of mediocre. They're not as big as the big names, but they're sort of in the middle somewhere. But they've got a few solid acts that they've
Yep.
signed to their label. But they know that if they're going to compete with the big boys, they've got to sign some bigger names, right? And so I think the record company is called Centennial Records, and the joke is Cemetery Records.
Oh,
The competition, I think, calls them Cemetery Records because that's where artists go to die or whatever, So
yeah.
it's been a few years since I saw it, but I loved the show. And in the opening episode, it really sets the tone for what's going to follow. And that is, I think this guy, Richie, he's been out driving around drinking. Maybe he had a fight with his wife or something. I don't know. But he pulls over. It's all taking place in New York. He pulls the car over on the side of the street, because he's drinking and he knows he shouldn't be out driving while he's drinking. And he's just going to sit there and think for a moment, what should I do? And as he's sitting there, he sees all these young people flocking towards something. He doesn't know,
Yeah.
but they all look like they're geared up to go party. And so he's watching them. And I guess his curiosity gets the best of him. So he follows them. And they go into, I guess, what would be best described as a small concert venue.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
small club.
Yeah. And he goes in, and the band playing is the New York Dolls. And again, this is taking place in 1974. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I was 13 and I was in touch with popular music at that time, and I never heard of these guys. And what was cool about this scene is he is the president of an actual record company, you know, in this series, and he's in touch with everything that's going on in the music world, and he doesn't know who these guys are either, the New York Dolls. All he knows is he goes into this club, this venue, and he's watching them perform, and they are just pure energy. They're electrifying. And he's looking around at the crowd who are just euphoric watching these guys perform. And I guess the message that we sort of take away from that scene, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. The message we take away is he is out there in this mainstream pop culture universe, and these guys who he's watching are underground, and he's seeing what they're doing, and he's seeing their followers, and in his mind he's like, how are we missing out on this? How is the rest of the world, the rest of the planet, missing out on this? I think to him this represents the future. This is where things are going. It was just a wonderful scene. It was the opening scene of episode 1. And I watched it and I said, I know I am going to love this show. Anyway,
Well,
I'll let you take it.
You missed out a key point.
Okay.
Is that in the episode, when they're watching him, the building collapses. They're rocking so hard.
Oh my gosh, I did forget about that.
And that, I always wondered, so I had to do a little bit of research if that actually happened or was a true story. Now that building did collapse.
Really?
Yes, around the same time period, but the New York Dolls were not actually playing then.
Okay.
But it was this supposedly supposed to be the same. It was a hotel, I believe, that actually collapsed in that year that happened. But the metaphor is what is the most powerful thing, is that he goes in there looking for an act, and here's this underground band that is so powerful that literally rocks the house down. It collapses the building. In real life, a couple people actually died from the collapse, but
it really is an amazing and memorable scene. It really, yeah, you're right. I forgot about that, but he's on a search to find a band, some artist who is going to boost his label and bring in lots of sales and money and revenue. And here these guys are right there before him, and he's never heard of them. And the scene is just pure energy.
What movie are you talking about?
We're talking about let me just sort of catch up. We began noting that this past week, David Johansen passed away.
It's okay.
Were you aware of that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I didn't know. Steve told me tonight, and that was my first knowledge of it. So we spent just a few minutes talking about David Johansen, and then we transitioned into this TV show Vinyl, because the opening scene of episode 1, the guy who's the president of the kind of small, medium-sized record label, purely by chance, accidentally discovers the New York Dolls. So, and that's how that show, it was only around for 1 season, but that's how it started.
Yep.
But before we go too far into that, Paul, any thoughts or any comments, anything you have about David Johansen, please
the guy was enormously talented. Like, it was one of these, a lot of people who get famous, you're like, that guy is a one-trick pony. That was not David Johansen. I loved him in Scrooged. I thought he was great in Scrooged. And he's got that gravelly voice, and super talented guy. I like some of the New York Dolls songs. I hear people irritated. They said they created the punk scene. They did not create the punk scene. They were along for the ride. Okay, Iggy Pop.
Doesn't Iggy Pop? Yeah, Iggy Pop gets credit for that, I think. Yeah.
Stooges. Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
But they played, I think, it's fair to say, an important role in bringing it from being obscure and unknown into because they brought it into the New York club scene, just like the Talking Heads did, and
the biggest
Ramones,
the biggest impact was the influence that they had on other musicians, and not necessarily on the public. It's you talk to musicians from the '80s. I mean, everybody was influenced by the New York Dolls. So.
Yes,
absolutely.
I mean,
they were
they're like the American Thin Lizzy.
No.
I say that in the sense that if you look at most rock guys from the 80s and 90s onwards, or 80s and 90s, those guys they always cite the New York Dolls and Thin Lizzy as major influences on them. So that's
true. They did give a direction to the glam as well, and they deserve credit for that too. So that
yeah. Okay, so Paul,
I love David Johansen.
That song "Personality Crisis," though, if for people who are not familiar with the New York Dolls, check out the song "Personality Crisis," and that goes to Paul's comment about David Johansen and how much talent he had, and just his voice on that song, and just that song will it'll rock you. I mean, that is a true rock song. So.
Yeah.
Remember when he did the Buster Poindexter stuff? I actually kind of reminded me a little of Seltzer a little bit, maybe. I don't know if Steve would agree with that, but
are you talking Brian Setzer?
Setzer, not Seltzer, a seltzer water. But his stuff with Buster Poindexter was that campy. I loved it. I just loved it.
Oh, I loved it too.
It had to grow on me because I didn't like it at first, but I love the fact that he doesn't take himself seriously. He's out there just being a goof and having fun, and more power to him.
That's one of the greatest personality traits of any human being of all time. Go ahead, Kenny. Sorry.
I concur. Paul, I have a question for you. I was telling Steve, I don't remember the date, but it was early 80s. It could have been 81, somewhere in there. I think it was very early MTV. There was a video performance of David Johansen, and he was singing a medley of 3 songs. And one of the songs was "I Got to Get Out of This Place" by the Animals from the 60s. Okay. And it's live. It's a live performance. And he does this medley, 3 songs, which probably takes 4 or 5 minutes. And then the song's over, everybody applauds, and the video ends. At the time I saw that, I had no earthly idea who David Johansen was or the New York Dolls.
I don't know how I knew. Maybe now I can't remember if they ever played at CBGB. They might have.
Probably.
I would guess they probably did, but I don't know.
But I saw them somewhere. Hold on. Did they do? You're gonna laugh on my face now. Did they do a cover of All the Young Dudes, or am I getting my?
I don't think so.
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
All right. I take back my stupid comment. Go ahead, Kenny.
David Bowie wrote All the Young Dudes, and I think he might have even done a version of it, but Mott the Hoople took it and turned it into a monster hit.
Yes. Okay.
I've heard that he did a version of it, but I don't know if I've ever heard it, which is surprising. And I gotta admit, I probably was well into my 20s before I realized that song was not David Bowie.
Right.
Which
anyway, so
I don't know if that's good or bad for. I mean, the song is amazing. I love the song, but
it's a great song, yeah. But anyway, Paul. So we're kind of just unscripted. We're just talking about David Johansen. We transitioned into we spent a moment on Gene Hackman. If you want to add any thoughts on Gene Hackman, please do.
Yeah, he wasn't a good-looking guy, but he was tall, and he was authoritarian, and he was like his role in Mississippi Burning was really good.
Yeah.
And Kenny and I I think you and I saw Hoosiers together. Did we not?
We did, yeah.
And we were going crazy.
Oh my God.
And I don't know. I have to go back and think, what's his best role? I mean, I love French Connection. I love it. But Hoosiers, in my opinion, was way better for him. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. I've already said, we talked about it earlier, Paul, but for me, it really is Lex Luthor.
Yeah, that's a
But
good
that's just
choice.
That was my
that's a
first
great choice.
introduction to Gene Hackman as a kid because I was like 4 years old when that was on HBO.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that shows his versatility. Like he could be funny, but like yeah, he would. Oh, God, can you imagine any other actor trying to pull off those jokes and the things
yeah,
he did?
who is
Right.
a better villain for that? I mean, who would be a better actor for that role? I mean, the you have to have that ability to
Oh,
be funny and be serious and sort of be, intimidating to some point and be somebody who doesn't have supernatural or superpowers but can be a foe for Superman. So
yeah. But like, if you think of, I don't even want to put the other actor, Kevin Spacey and
he did a
Jesse
good job.
Eisenberg.
Yeah,
Huh?
it wasn't bad.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was pretty
I thought
good.
Kevin Spacey was fine, but for me it was, I mean, Paul and I always talk about the Otisburg bit, and so
Yeah.
I mean that is one of the funniest bits in the history of cinema, where
Because he's
they write on the map his little buddy, played by Ned Beatty, Otis, writes on the map. It's like Lutherville, Lexville, and then Otisburg.
but he writes Otisburg like in crayon or something.
Yeah, he writes it.
It's a very small place, boss.
Right.
It's just a little itty bitty place.
Right.
So
The number 200, my IQ and your weight. What other movies is he funny in? Like, I can't remember. He was funny in another movie. I just can't remember.
Well, he
I would
was
have
in-
to. I would
he was
have
in
to
the
go back and.
Birdcage. One of his funniest roles was he played the straight, like the straight character. In the Birdcage, he was a senator,
that's right.
congressman, in that movie, and so he was pretty funny in that. When
Yes, you know what? You know what, Steve? You're right. I'm gonna go back. Damn you, Steve. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that movie this weekend. That's a funny movie.
Well,
is-
but
But
he's been in
what-
so many movies; it's really difficult to think of them all and to think of the comedies versus the dramas versus the murder mysteries. But he's so many good ones.
Hold on. Was he in Uncommon Valor or am I on
Yes.
drugs?
yes,
No, he was.
Yep,
He
yep.
was, and that was kind of a low budget movie, but it was really good. Really
Yeah,
good.
it was.
I
Patrick
rewatched that
Swayze
recently within the last couple of years, and I think it still holds up pretty well.
It
Well,
does. Yeah. No, it does.
One of these days we could talk about Randall Tex Cobb. Not tonight, but we could do a whole show on him.
Yeah.
I got stories that you guys probably aren't aware of about him.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so we covered. Listen, I wanted to mention Gene Hackman because he's been a part of virtually my entire life, and you too, Paul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love him.
So, but because it's classic rock, I don't want to stay on him. But anyway, it's if we're gonna do a rest in peace for David Johansen, there's no reason we shouldn't mention Gene Hackman too.
Could not agree more.
Let's sort of circle back to vinyl now. And by the way, we did get our warning, so we won't stay on too much longer.
Oh, before we go to vinyl,
Okay, go ahead.
how can can I download that? How can I see that?
I'm pretty sure you
The
can.
show vinyl.
Yeah.
It's on. Well, it's on. If you have, it's on HBO. So if you have a HBO app,
Okay, I'll find. I know Kenny and I know where to find it. All right, go ahead,
Yeah.
Kenny. Sorry.
Is it on? It might be on. Is it on Netflix or
no,
Amazon
it would
Prime?
be. HBO has their own streaming service.
Okay. All
So
right.
it's probably on there. So
Okay. All right. Okay.
Matt.
Anyway, so back to vinyl, and Paul, what I was telling Steve was it had been recommended to me by some guy at the gym who knew I was into music, and based upon the fact that it had Scorsese's and Mick Jagger's name attached to it, I was kind of like, I want to see this, and it's one season only, 8 episodes, and it's easily one of the best shows I've ever seen, and especially because of the subject matter. It does a deep dive into the music industry, into the nuts and bolts and the personalities. And there are a lot of fabricated characters, but virtually everyone is based on a real life person. And so it's sort of a partially fictitious and partially factual thing. They blend it
Yeah.
well. But
there's a Sex Pistols band
right.
a punk band that's supposed to be like the Sex Pistols, even though they're not British, but
Right. And they had a guy who was like a walking duplicate of Sly and the Family Stone. I forget.
Yes,
Yeah, I forget who his
exactly.
name was.
He
You
was
know,
the big artist that was on their record label, I think, if I
yes,
remember right.
yes, and it also shows how the different labels are cutthroat when it comes to trying to sign artists, who they believe are going to be huge. And Steve, there was a scene. It was one of the last episodes. He had walked. Somebody had said, "Hey, I want you to hear this guy. He's a young guy, but and he walks in, and the kid is sitting at a piano playing, and he's singing "Life on Mars," Bowie,
Yeah.
and if you look at him, he kind of looks like him. So
Well, I thought it was supposed to be Bowie.
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I think they said his name and it was something else.
Okay.
But that was one of the things I loved about the show was even if they changed the name, you knew exactly who that person was. And anyway, he's sitting there at the piano by himself and he's singing and playing Life on Mars. And I just went, wow, I had forgotten how good that song is. I think the last time I had heard it, I was a teenager, and it just doesn't resonate the same then as in when you hear it years later. And I was like, this show is just so full of surprises and unexpected twists and interesting characters and great dialogue. I can't say enough good things about it.
The thing that I really liked about it also was the fact that it just showed you kind of behind the scenes of the music industry, and the fact like that the band that was supposed to be like the Sex Pistols, they kept commenting, these guys they don't know how to play their instruments, like they're not good musicians.
Right.
And it really was about the image and just
Right.
and kind of the attitude more than it actually was about the music, at least for that particular band. So I found that fascinating.
Right.
Just fascinating. So,
No, I agree. Also, you just reminded me, Ray Romano was in that.
yes, he was. That's right. Yeah.
And he was good because he's not a comedic role.
I think he was like, wasn't he one of the accountants?
The accountants. He was an accountant, a bookkeeper. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was some shady business
yes.
practices.
Yes. I don't want to give too much away, but I'm telling you that plot line really gets interesting. It really does.
It sucks they only made one, because I think Steve told me about it, and then another friend of mine, Poop, told me about it, and I was like, and then I just didn't have HBO.
Led Zeppelin. There's one of the episodes. Led Zeppelin's in it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's supposed to be at Madison Square Garden. They go behind, backstage after the show. The song remains the same at the recording.
Movie.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk about real quick, we can talk about next week, is I sent you guys the I think Netflix did it. It was a series about the company who made all the album covers for all the big British bands and American bands. And the stories behind each album cover of like Presence and Into the Outdoor and all these album covers, Pink Floyd, how they filmed the Animals cover, how they made it.
Paul, if you did, and I'm not denying it, but I don't think
it's been a while back.
So how about resending
I'll send it again.
Okay. Yeah, I don't recall it. It must be in your dreams that you sent it, Paul.
No, I sent it. All right, what else? We are out of time.
We're just about out of time, so I'll tell you what, we're below 3 minutes remaining. So now we're down to 3. So if anybody has any, it doesn't have to be related to tonight's show, but just anything that's on your mind or any thoughts or opinions or comments or anything, please feel free, and then we'll just wrap it up.
Again, if you in the audience, please check out Becoming Led Zeppelin. I'm gonna go see it again this weekend with a buddy of mine here. I want to see if it moves me as much the second time. I know it will. That was kind of a stupid thing to say, but anyway, it's worth seeing if you're a Zeppelin fan.
Let me add this really quick because I get a kick out of it. Any video that the three of us do with the words Led Zeppelin in the title, it gets a bunch of views. I swear I could title it, "This video is not about Led Zeppelin." We'd get 1 million views. So anyway, yeah, of course that one took off and got way more than usual. So
the other cool thing about it, we talked about this, and Steve and I talked about it when we did the show about it. When they first played in London, they had like moms and dads and kids in there, and that's pretty. But what's amazing is they put that in the movie. Like,
yes,
they wanted.
There was like 9-year-old kids there and like 40-year-old moms, and they're like, "What is this?"
And they've got their hands over their ears. But what's funny is, like, Steve, I think it gives the movie more humanity to show how these people who don't know anything about music reacted.
Totally.
Like,
Yeah, that's the best part.
Okay, but Paul, I think that comment you just made is a little bit unfair, because you say people that didn't know anything about music, their sound at that moment in time was so radically different from what music was that anybody was entitled to react a certain way.
Well, hold on. But again, 3 months later, they go to San Francisco, and the guy says, if this doesn't take off here, it's over. And they started playing, and the crowd there went ape shit. They're like,
no, but I think maybe there's a little bit difference between the Brits and Americans, and maybe what they were expecting.
But of course, every British band that makes it big, that's exactly what happens, Steve.
We're talking about the late 60s. I mean, the Beatles are coming close to an end at that point.
Keep in mind,
nothing else out there like that.
Hold on. Keep in mind now that before they ever even became popular, the Allman Brothers built their name by touring, and that's what they were doing. They were doing these long jam sessions, blues rock songs. So if audiences were digging that, they were going to dig Zeppelin.
Yeah. 1 minute left. Less than a minute.
We're out of time.
I saw this documentary where Freebird, where Leonard Skinner said we were inspired to make a 30-minute version of Freebird by listening to the Allman Brothers.
Shut up. Okay, that's going to do it for tonight. This is the Great Classic Rock Debate. I'm Kenny.
I'm Paul.
I'm Steve.
If you're watching right now, please like, comment, and subscribe. We will love you for that. Until we see you, we'll see you next time.